call this meeting of the school committee for the city of Lewiston, Maine to order for March the 2nd, 2022 at 5:34 p.m. You join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Agenda item number 2 is to receive and discuss the FY 2023 budget overview. Superintendent Langlis will present.
I'm just going to pull up the memo and share it on my screen so that others can view it. Give me just a moment. Members of the committee, you have a hard copy document. As we're going to be having binders, we put a paper clip to your documents tonight. If you want to hold on to them, you're welcome to. If you want to leave them with me for the binders, you're welcome to do that also. But we'll keep all of these materials together for your use, or you can hold on to them to put in the binder when you get it. Want to kick off with some things that I feel like I learned from last year's process that I wanted to bring to this committee, and we'll work through some further detail. But I felt that last year the committee landed itself in what I think was a bit of a difficult position, in that there were a number of items that were carved out of the budget prior to it getting to you. And some of those items were passionate topics for members on the committee. And because they were carved out of the budget in advance, what happened, at least in part, was there were things that people wanted to put back. And while that may still happen, what happened last year is the list of things to put back became 70 items long. And that 70 item long list was at the end of our budget process. And so I want to be upfront, let you know that I'm taking a very deliberate and intentional approach to not do that this year. The committee will make its decisions, and if we end up in that scenario, then we do, and that might be necessary depending on how things go. But just so you know, I'm trying to steer away from that. I think it lands us in a challenging position with the community and also the city council, who feels like things were chugging along and then all of a sudden something changed. The caveat to that, though, with that kind of pendulum shift in the approach, the numbers that we're going to discuss tonight are bigger. But that's on purpose, in that less things have been already cut out of this than we would have done last year. Many of those things are things that got put back last year. And so when you see some big numbers tonight, I need to let you know that I anticipate this process to involve numerous recommendations from me and my team of things that we work through and make some tough decisions to reduce the number that you see tonight. So it is a deliberate process that you have voice, our community has voice in the items in the spots of passion, and that we work ourselves to a place with what I'm hopeful to be as a conservative budget, given the times, but also one that we can maximize to meet the most of our students' needs as best as we can. So with that, I'm going to jump in and work my way through the document and have some talking points. I would invite the committee, if at any point in time you have a question or comment, please feel free to chime in. I would also say, if you have things that you want us looking into, that throughout the process, you share those with us. We'll go find you the answers and we'll bring them back. That's always our goal, to be as transparent as we possibly can be. So I'll jump in. And I apologize that this is going to feel like you're being read to, but I don't want to miss details for the public. As an introduction, fiscal year 2023 budget binders will be available to all of you the end of this week, and binders for the city council will be compiled prior to our March meeting. They get them in advance. But we have a lot of work to do, I think, before we put documents in front of them. Also, budget material will be posted on our website next week as we have our binders available, should someone want to look at that layer of the draft. Sometimes you hear me say things like that layer of the draft. I consider what you will have in the binder as the superintendent's version or that layer of the draft. The work that you do becomes the school committee version or layer or draft, okay? And so just, I want to share that with you, that what I'm bringing to you is a starting point, and then the work that we do becomes the school committee version that we bring to the city council.
Sorry, I have a question already.
It's all right.
Should we be picking up our binder books at Dingley Building on Friday? What is the protocol on that now?
We'll have them available on Friday, and yeah, I think a pickup is fine if that works for everyone. We'll have them all at Dingley. Anyone who can't pick them up Friday, I can bring them Monday for whatever's left.
What time? What time on Friday? Like after a certain time?
Anytime afternoon time. And I'd say probably before 4 o'clock or so. Yeah, yeah. If that's a snag for anyone, I'm right here in town, so let me know and we can make it work. The budget obviously will undergo a thorough review in a series of March meetings. We meet twice a week throughout, and we have other meetings if need be. The budget meetings are scheduled on the 2nd, obviously today, next Monday and Wednesday, the 7th and 9th, and then the following week, the 14th and the 16th. And then we do the city workshop. We host that particular meeting. That will be here, and that's on the 21st. In that meeting, we share information of progress of where we're at. That's not a final number date necessarily, but we want to, in this time frame, be really close to where we think we're going to be, so that the city has a real good pulse on where we're at. The council will then be presented the budget by me in early April on the 12th. That presentation uses the information that we have gone through, obviously, but also with input from the council when we meet on the March 21st. So overall budget summary. Some of this is philosophical, but the work of educating our students is an incredible opportunity, but it's also an awesome responsibility. Student-centered approach will continue to be used in each iteration of the budget process. Our teachers, educational technicians, and support staff continue to make the most of teaching and learning for our students with limited resources. Education has faced a fundamental shift due to the pandemic. The trauma of the pandemic impacts are real, and no one is invincible to its impact. Patients often run shorter, fatigue sets in quicker, pressures of beliefs, worry, concern for self and others, policy, law, messaging, media, disruptions, inconsistency, and so much more. One can easily imagine the impact this has had on the learning environment. In the face of all of this, our staff have consistently risen to the occasion, but we know we can and must do better. With a return to routine and the availability of much needed resources, I'm confident Lewiston Public Schools will continue to be a cornerstone in the strengthening of our community. And I say that strengthening of our community because we are producing tomorrow's workforce. We are preparing students for the jobs that are open right now in the labor market, and that is a cornerstone of our economics. This year, the approach of building the budget, as I mentioned earlier, will involve careful balance of educational needs and fiscal realities. We are aware that the current tax structures and school funding formulas are not able to do everything we should, but we will continue to maximize what we can with the resources we have. As we move through the budget process, here are some procedural considerations that would be important to keep in mind. Specific areas for improvement that involve measurable impacts will be shared. This committee has already expressed that they want to know more and understand the whys and the reasons behind pieces, and we will take the time to do that. The things that we're bringing to you of things that we would like to do structurally, we're going to explain why we want to do that and how we can monitor its success. Requests will be accompanied by a context that includes needs and constraints wherever possible. There will be things that we might say, hey, we want to not do this thing. There may be a constraint around it. We'll try to share those with you. plan to have those shared as we talk about different items. If, again, as throughout the process, as we discuss articles, if you say, hey, why do we do this? We can go get those answers, identify any constraints, legal or otherwise, and bring them back. Creating a parking lot of budget items that are seemingly impossible to say no to serve to create a false sense of prioritization and process of adding back that influenced the elimination of other already approved items in order to balance the budget proposal. Avoiding this approach will allow for more focused and balanced decision-making process. That's what I was mentioning before. I don't want to create what feels like a wish list. We're gonna have to make some tough decisions on the way and not just postpone them and say, put them all back. Corrections to how items have been distributed across articles will be explained. We've been in quite a transition the last 2 years. And for those of you who are relatively new to the committee, we have a lot of the house back in order, and it's a nice feeling. Our financial side of the house has good leadership and people who are very capable with the work that they're doing. We have found numerous, and I mean numerous things that we needed to correct. We have found things that were not included in budgets, even though they were approved by this body last year. We found corrections. Some of them are good size. So you may see things like increases in articles, but decreases in others. We want to explain those. When we say articles, and we'll talk about that a little more. Share this real quick. I think that's enough. I'm not going to go through all this right at the moment, but the sheet that you're about to get is a list of the articles and what's in them. These are guided. Excuse me. These are guided by state law. Those.
Can you scroll up? You're on a different. Thank you.
Probably should have had you share. So these are the articles that govern why are things in that place. So when we talk about different budget components, I'll give you a good example, and this comes up on a regular basis. How much does it cost to do this? Just widget making in our district. Well, widget making might land in 5 different articles. And so it might be very difficult for us to just give you an answer, but we can go in each space and look at them. One of those areas might be, for an example, facilities. You might want to know how much it is to do a certain thing. Facilities may have an article component in our operations area of the articles, but it also may have components within each school. And so we also have situations where a staff is split between schools. So you might say, well, what is a 0.25 teacher in a budget line? Well, that 0.25 teacher spends a quarter of their time in that space and other time in other spaces. So it can get complex, but just so you have this as a guide for different articles. The resources, I'm looking at number 5, the resources needed have not been fully included in the initial budget proposal. I'm mentioning that because there are millions of dollars worth of requests and things from last year that are not in this proposal. Things that I've already put my eyes on with my team, Karen, Bill, Adam, Sue, and we have said, we're not able to do that right now. It's a good request, it's meaningful, and we'll share some of those along the way. I wanted to make sure that we set the stage accurately, that this is high and we want to work it down, in my opinion, but it is not as high as it could have been. There's already been rounds of looking for positions to eliminate, rounds of how else could we pay for certain things, and also being mindful of what we are asking for. And then 6, we anticipate reductions to the initial proposal as a result of the discussions we have. Lewiston Public Schools leadership has engaged in discussions designed to build a shared mission, vision, and goals that supports its realization. This work starts with a presumption. So I just want you to kind of pause for a second. We did this a little bit at our retreat, but just that presume. I presume that I can envision what schools will look like if in 3 years from today, if you looked around and saw an amazing, successful school system, what would it look like and how did you get there? And so we continue to ask these questions and do this work. But in that, it started to form themes. And if you scroll down just a little more here, the themes that started to reveal themselves, and these aren't the only themes, but these were the heavier hitters. And through prompts and these themes, we've used to generate areas of focus for this budget. The first one is improve instruction systematically. Or systemically. Karen, which one should I use?
I'm sorry.
Systemically. I apologize. If I could just read my own document. Improve our special education structure to improve programming, grow pathways for graduation, maintain our equity, social, emotional, and coping skills development efforts, school safety, and stability in our overall structure and communication. Those aren't ranked, they're just a list. I think those all have great priority for us. With these areas of focus in mind, school leadership was asked at the start of the budget process in December of 21 to work with their school-based teams to build their site's budget with knowledge that we are not adding positions that are not aligned to the areas of focus, and that we are prioritizing return to classroom instruction supplies and materials, our local budget that we pushed off last year as part of that parking lot process to make sure we could still have items in a science class to do the curriculum. We had to use emergency relief funds to stand those up. Those funds will sunset. You're going to hear me say that 100 times. We want to make sure that we're mindful of that process. As a result of this building-based process, proposals were generated that resulted in an unachievable increase that surpassed 20% of our total budget. So where that works is we sat with the management team, our principals, our directors. We said, go back and work with your schools, your department heads, what have you, find out what the needs are. But I gave them the directive that if you want to add something in your school, I want you to find a way to pay for it within the budget you already have. We had some schools request very little, if anything at all. And it was still 20% additional to our budget. And I have here in all caps that this was reduced to emphasize that as a priority of the superintendent in the initial budget proposal to all of you. The state has increased our subsidy, which helps contribute to the mandated minimum teacher salary of $40,000. State mandate, I think it's a fair amount for teachers as hard as they work. But this increase is necessary for the work that our educators do, but it's a mandated cost. The budget draft also assumes an increase in the assessed value of our city and considers the fact that local increases in the budget over the last several years have not met inflation or other contractual constraints. The mill rate calculation details for year-to-year comparisons should be available over the next week or so to provide further context for budget discussions. You won't see mill rate impacts today. We are in conversation with Heather. The document she shared the other day, she gave us some overview pieces, but it starts to come together for all of us and it starts to tell us what the true numbers are. And so that we can be as accurate as possible, those will come. If the level of local funding from last year is maintained, this budget as proposed, I'm going to pause, as proposed, knowing that we have work to do, and I put this number in on purpose, would result in a $5.3 million shortfall. That would be a local tax burden. So as we have conversations and everyone around the table is passionate about different items, please know we will have passionate things that we have to let go of or we have to reduce. We anticipate an active budget cycle at the school committee level that will result in reductions. Whatever the final result of this process is, there are limited ways to close whatever gap may remain. One or more ways this could be bridged include further reductions, which I mentioned, and the other is an increased tax rate. We do not anticipate additional funding from an emergency relief perspective that will help us float, carry, or kick the can down the road. This is the year. We have hard work to do. Additionally, expenses are rising by 8.64%, which is roughly made up of the following major components. Increase in salary and benefits. We have 6 groups negotiating or about to. We have contracts that have step increases. All of these things happen, and in each of the last 2 years, the growth of our budget has not sustained the growth in those contracts. Remaining debt service for the voter-approved high school expansion. There's still some significant debt service in there. A required state minimum teacher salary, which I mentioned. There's also,
The expansion.
Yep.
If I recall correctly, on the expansion, which was voter approved,
yes,
there's about $1 million a year in debt service. And that's something that really, it shows up in our budget, but it was approved by referendum so once you take on that debt, you have no choice but to pay it. And it's around $1 million a year going forward for 15 years.
So that's, when the voters approved the expansion, that wasn't the voters of Lewiston approved to pay for that? That
it
was,
is that they vote to pay for it, but it's like
Okay.
a mortgage. They pay for it over 15 years.
okay, all right.
Yeah, so what Chair Damon is saying is that that contribution is over $1 million annually right now. It was actually higher last year and it will start rolling back. It gets smaller annually, but that is a real factor. So the hardship for us in the work that we do, when people look at a total and their tax rate and forget about the vote 2 years ago, it's $1 million less that you have to work with as a school committee when you're making decisions about how to best educate our students. But we have upgraded our facility, obviously, in a very beautiful way that's provided different opportunities for students, and I think that's also valuable.
One of the other points about that is like with this building, the state Department of Education paid like 97% of the cost of this building. I think the local share here was less than $3 million. Part of that was to make sure that the whole thing was air conditioned, so that the public debt, which continues to be, that's part of our budget as well, is getting paid down on this one. There's still, I believe, debt service on the expansion at the middle school. That was also local. When we do projects that are not state funded, we have to get them approved by the voters, but the voters end up owning that debt service going forward. And that's made pretty clear typically, but it's not just the expansion at the high school. There are other components of it that have not completely run the course.
You will see, if you're looking at city documents, you'll see the debt service components for things like Connors Elementary School. And Heather will do a real good job of carving that out, saying reimbursed by the state or something to that effect. But it sits on our books as a liability, but the state then issues those funds back. The second part of that bullet is other compliance costs from the Department of Justice and the Department of Labor. We have things that we have to be compliant with that are legally our responsibility. Improving special education structure and programming. I've tried to front load that a bit with both our community and all of you. Our special education programming has already started to get better, and we have a lot of work to do. Overall inflation, I know it's impacting everybody at home. It's also impacting us at schools. Some of it's fuel, although those kinds of costs are less of an uptick, or utilities, I should say, are less of an uptick because we're a school than it might be for you residentially. But there's still a growth there. We're also seeing an uptick in all of our supplies, timeframe, supply chain, you name it. It's all part of inflation is a factor in what we have for resources. I think the important piece of that is we're not looking to grow a lot of resources this year. We're looking to return resources from relief funding that's going to sunset. And if we put dollar for dollar back, it's less than it could buy a year ago.
when you're talking about inflation and when we're looking at the electric bill for this district, maybe you've talked about this before, but I know my CMP bill, the standard rate doubled. Are we locked into something, or have our rates doubled in the school district as well? Like, what are we looking at for next year?
Our rates
Or-
have gone up. I don't have it offhand, but it's not as much as residential. I know that.
It's not. Okay.
And I think the way it works, because we're locked in.
For
as
how
well.
long? We're locked until 2025.
Yeah, so Bill and Adam on the side here who work in our office are saying that we're locked until 2025. We typically work with the city on those kinds of approaches
Mhm.
As a municipality, so that can have that cost benefit overall. Returning classroom materials and supplies from federal emergency pandemic funds to the local budget as federal funds will sunset. And also needed increases in resources to support our ELL population. Students are still arriving here, and our population is again, our enrollments are again growing. The labor market is incredibly challenging, as you know. You've heard me talk about it quite a lot. Many current staff are operating on an emergency certification waiver. This means that they're doing their very best, but they have not had the coursework or related classroom experiences required for certification with the state of Maine. These staff need support. They're doing a great job. They really are, but they need support. And in the good ones that we are hoping desperately to keep, not only do they need support because they want to get better and use good modern instructional practices, they need support because the certification deadline will come. And they will need support from us so that they can be working toward whatever that conditional or professional certification is. The Department of Justice has issued terms of settlement agreement that requires training, in-class coaching by trained staff, additional positions, which is kind of mentioned above with our ELL. There are also components of that agreement that include disciplinary procedures, abbreviated days, and some special education components. That's not all of it, but I want to make sure you know that the DOJ settlement agreement was not solely about language learning. It was a more complicated set of conditions than that. There are proposed new positions and changes in positions in special education. Pause there for a moment and you'll hear a lot of detail. We're going to do a full presentation about the special education changes we're looking to do. But Special Ed Director Crafts has done a great job itemizing, using input from different audits. What can we shed to, one, help pay for things so that we have stability and consistency in our structures? And two, what can we shed because it shouldn't be there and it should not have been there last year? The audit effort has been great. One of the things that I can tell you right now is we have been working this week already, well, for many weeks, but this week coming to find things like digging down to the nitty gritty with a fine tooth comb to say, this ed tech is in our budget. Who was it tied to? When is it still needed? Every single position. And some of the things that we have found in special education is we have an ed tech position that is tied to an IEP of a student who is no longer at Lewiston Public Schools. But that position stayed on our books. So we're getting these all together so we can give you a real clear picture. But when we talk about special education, we'll be talking about a solid number of the positions we're reducing, and it's a big number. Classroom size reduction teachers. This pops up here and there. This may have come up back when Member Scott was chair. We had classroom size issues at the very young grades, and we put teachers in to reduce. Some of it was a waiver, and some of it we hired people and put them in to reduce class sizes. Well, some of those teachers still remain, but they're not booked properly. They remain in title funds, which are not to be used to do this very kind of work. And you're talking some positions that are 4, 5, and 6 years old, maybe even older. Karen, you can correct me if some are even much older. And so what that looks like on paper is we're using funds that could be used and dedicated for interventions in reading and math or language arts and math. And we're carving them out and we're kind of robbing from professional learning, direct interventions, and other supports we could be providing for kids who need that boost, that help. And we're putting teacher positions in them. And as we look for efficiencies, what we're finding, when we use federal dollars to pay for a teacher, we pay federal tax brackets. So to us, as a school system, a teacher in a federal spot is more expensive than a teacher in a non-federal spot. So not only are we consuming those dollars, which is not doing what we intend to do for the students, it's consuming more of those dollars. So you'll see positions in this budget that we're trying to get back in so that we can appropriate those dollars accurately, which could save us money in other spots. But we'll go through it in more detail and try to explain it really well. There's also a JV volleyball coach. Last year, this committee approved a volleyball coach to start a program up at the high school. And the participation was unbelievable. And so much so that they actually feel that it would best serve the students if there was a JV coach. So that will be up for discussion. That's a stipend position. Also, middle school lacrosse, for many years, they had a club that funded that and parents who kind of got that going. And they have followed the steps to put in a request for a middle school lacrosse coach. Computer science has been an effort in our district for many years now. We've worked through multiple grants. They've been very supportive. Those are ongoing. One of the classroom spaces in the new wing is actually a computer science lab. We've had hardware donated. There's a whole lot of funding support out there for computer science, so much so that we want to contribute kind of our own to grow our ability to have instruction in computer science. There is a lot of support for student pathways right through high school and associates and beyond degrees while in high school just around computer science. 7 to 12 teachers, grades 7 through 12 teachers for student pathways to graduation. This is really talking about that next step effort that has both middle and high school students. But as they grow their population, we want to grow the resources they have to meet the needs of those students. There are items in this budget proposal that are not mutually exclusive. We have proposed changes to special education to generate stability and high turnover positions, bring things into compliance, support families, and create local programming. These proposals all have costs we will walk through in presentation format. But again, they're not mutually exclusive. What I mean by that, it may cost us money, and once in implementation, it will save us money. But I'm not making dollar for dollar promises in the budget proposal. And I think you all know that it takes time to stand certain things up. But there are some savings, and we'll talk about that much more. If we can fund these items, we'll be able to provide education for students at home that we currently send to facilities away. For example, there are over 50 students on outplaced waiting lists currently right now. I think Kirsten will probably tell me it's 60 right now, but I put in 50 because I know that she was just over it not too long ago. These are students that have qualified, have an IEP. They should be receiving these services that we do not have the space or resources to provide here. And they're on waiting lists elsewhere. So we provide alternative services in the meantime. It's not best for the student. And when these students go to these outplaced programs, we pay massive costs for their tuition and massive costs for their transportation. Some of these students are local, and that's not terrible. Some of these students get in a bus or a van and go as far as Saco or over to Brunswick every single day for school, and their transportation is specialized because of the level of need. The math is simple. Each student we keep at home not only improves the student experience and makes the connection better for families, it saves incredible amounts of money. We have space here at Connors and a plan for implementation. In addition, through the changes and improvements we have made, we have uncovered funds that we're leaving on the table. The funds we're leaving on the table is projected to be $400,000 plus through main care billing. To realize the stability and savings needed to improve our programming, informed by multiple third-party and internal audits, we need to resource this effort. The $400,000 is essentially this. When we provide certain services to certain students and we document that appropriately, we submit it to the state, we get reimbursed. Right now, it's not happening. There's just no capacity to do it. So when we found out there could be potentially approaching $500,000 that could come back to this district in reimbursement, and the only reason we're not getting it is we're not filing it. We want to resource that. That will pay for itself. Enrollment, this is a plus. Last year we had some concerns and I had pushed out and shared that our enrollment was down. We're up 314 students from last year, and last year was around 300 that we were down. So we feel good about where we're at. The reason that is important, when we talk more about the ED 279 document, the EPS, or the Essential Programs and Services, their formula for how much subsidy we get is built off of our student enrollments specifically. Another point to that is when we talk about different pathways for students to achieve graduation, those students are also in school. They count in our enrollments, and if they drop out, they do not. And so if we have enough students that continue to stay engaged with school, again, these programs can contribute to the cost of paying them. Skip down to the budget summary. The draft budget is summarized below and includes total revenue and expenditures of $101,407,138,000. $138. And that's up 8.63% from the current budget. And again, I emphasize this time I use bold. I want to emphasize that we continue to make reductions and corrections. Please don't be scared of that number. The only thing that would be wrong with that number, again, in my opinion, is if that's what we end with. This is to start, be as transparent as we can so that we can find those things that we reduce. And we'll share additional reductions throughout the school committee budget process. And that will start again as soon as next week. Here you have the breakdown. You can see a comparison between FY23 and FY22. And the local minimum tax. I want to point out something we'll talk more about in ED 279, but the local minimum tax is directly impacted by the state's % of contribution. Last summer, Governor Mills issued additional funding to schools to meet the 55% mark. But in doing so, it's like a scale. So when the state puts in their 55%, our local responsibility goes down. Now that's great from a tax-based perspective, but when you have a minimum salary for teachers, contract steps, and a pretty broken special education system, that scale can get heavy on one side, and we have to figure that out. Debt services in here, you'll see a number of over 2 million. As Bruce mentioned, about half of that is the expansion. The rest is, again, pieces, middle school expansion. There's probably some money in there from Farwell and things like that, it takes years to pay these things down. And every year that we pay them down, those cost drivers shrink until we add something to it. I do want to point out, this came out last year and from at least a couple of members, the debt service in this conversation and LCIP function separately. Okay, those do function a little separately. Additional local tax, you see that $7.7 million number. Last year, we were $815,000 over the local minimum. The local minimum went down, and certainly that big number represents where we're starting from. When you see total and then note 1 down below, I have notes for each section. So I'll share information about these just various notes. So the total is representing that top section. Next piece down, you have the state contribution. And this is where you can see that difference. So that when you think of the scale, so last year, 66, 467, this year, 68 and plus. So that's where that scale gets heavier on the state side to get to that 55%, but then it reduces the local required minimum share. Unexpended funds. Every year we have an unexpended fund balance carryover. Part of the audit process, they itemize what things we did not spend. Throughout the pandemic, starting with CRF funds and then ESSER funds, if we hear us say those things, those are all just emergency relief funds because of COVID. Each of the last 2 years, we have used significant amounts of federal relief dollars to save money locally. If you have a pot and you have a time frame to spend it, which all those funds had, you spend it to save what you can, to do what you can do, knowing that sunset, and some of them came quickly. And so in that effort, we've saved an incredible amount of money. The challenge to that will be, you're asking for money, but you didn't spend it all. And we need to understand that we didn't spend it all on purpose so that we could save money locally, build up that rainy day fund, and then start to calculate how we tear out into the future. We have in here to use $5 million of unexpended funds. That is where we ended up last year. Last year, we were looking at a $5.9 million balance. We used 5. This year, we're at the fund balance carryover, $7.7 million. Another contributing factor is the unfilled positions because of the labor market. So it can create this false sense that, well, you have so much money, you're not spending it. Well, realistically, if we had the right amount of teachers and we didn't have emergency relief funds, which are sunsetting, we would be freezing our budget in the fall or not hiring positions that we need. So we put in here to use 5 million again, as we did last year, and not an uncommon occurrence to use fund balance carryover in your budget. In other revenue, there's a note below, I'll explain that, but that's some of those small things that come in, facilities rentals, things like that. So then you have a total revenue budget, again, of 101,415,358. Last year it was 93. You can see the shift.
The final was 93 or the stage in the process was 93?
No, last year the approved budget was 93. Yep. And you can see that the request is a 8.63% increase overall. So going down into notes. Local property taxes, the increase of 6.9 as we start the review process is the starting point to anticipated reductions. The mill rate will be calculated. Again, we're looking at that more next week when we have more numbers. And the tax rate will determine the cost of the increase to taxpayers. I'll be including city valuation and tax information as that information becomes available and the budget draws closer to its final proposal. Now I'll work with Heather at the city to verify calculations throughout the budget process with the school committee. That tax calculation piece, last year, we had sorted it out, but there were some questions that had come up. What if we did this? What would be the savings? What would that reduce the tax burden? So 2 things. One is we can figure that out if we pause for a moment. Once we have that tax calculation that's we know is to be certain. And 2, further down in this document, I gave you examples of how much reduces by how much. That might help guide some decision making. The K-12 educational subsidy, that's note 2, that goes up to that state contribution. That's ED 279, and I brought a copy of that with us. I have a slideshow, but I want to review that and give you a chance to answer some questions. But that will start to, it can be a blessing and a curse for those of you who have lived that document before. When you start getting into the specific semantics of, I shouldn't say semantics, but individualized ratios and how the state comes to their total, it almost feels like you can do the straight math. And then you realize that they also prorate things to provide for the best that they can for equal distribution to districts of varying levels of need. So when you get into the very specific math, some of it plays out, but all of it doesn't. And so I want you to have the constructs of that so you understand subsidy, but it's not a straight equation. We sit waiting for this document to be released so we know what numbers we're working with.
Jake, that'll come within the next month or so before we're done.
We actually have that, the ED 279. Yep, we have those numbers. We'll talk about. I actually that's this will share.
That one.
Yeah, and we'll go into that a little bit after. Just so you know, on Monday we moved a couple of items. This ED 279 document was one of them. So we have it tonight. I'll do an overview and we can always revisit it. And again, this subsidy figure is based on the governor's budget, which includes a number of proposed changes in the school expenditure model called Essential Programs and Services. And that's shown in that document we've also shared. I want to make a note too that last year in the legislative process and with state surplus, a one-time additional allocation was given to school departments to meet the state goal of 55%, which is what is in legislation. In July of 2021, school committee approved use of some funds and the remainder was unbudgeted as the budget was already established and other funding sources were prioritized. The overall level of state support for general education is presently slated to increase, but it drops the required local minimum shares I've mentioned. The request this year is to maintain and increase potentially prior funding to reflect local assessed value growth and resources needed to improve our schools. Modified calculation methods were used this year due to enrollment concerns around the state. Again, doesn't really impact us here. Last year, there was a lot of concern, especially in smaller districts. If you lose 50 kids in a smaller district, you're shutting down a wing. That money is critical. We are a much bigger district, and again, our enrollment numbers are up. But that's what gets into how the ED 279 formulas don't necessarily just do straight math. The state has some decision-making behind the scenes on that. Unexpended from the prior year. I touched on these items, but I will go through this quickly. We had 7.7 million of unassigned funds from FY21. You notice the gap there. So this is part of that auditing process and there's a bit of a delay. And then those are those unexpended or fund balance carryover items that you'll see. So if we have 7.7 and we propose to use 5, that's 2.7 that we can put in that rainy day fund. Problem becomes that fund balance carryover can get too high. And as the federal dollar sunset and the local trajectory tightens, if that's what the economy is doing, it can be a real challenge to continue to fund things like a community feeling like they've contributed all they can in certain years, and there's no additional funding anywhere. How do you pay for all the teachers' next contract step? Or an adjustment in insurance that goes up, or more families that take insurance that last year didn't. And so these are all considerations that we have to factor. Over time, we want to use less and less fund balance because we want to have less and less fund balance. We want to narrow that scope. The state actually has provisions around that. Right now it's at 9%, which was a COVID-related adjustment. It typically runs around, is it 5? Bill, do you recall? 3%. It'll. Okay, so typically it's 3%. It's been put at 9 because of the federal funding and COVID pandemic. But over, I think it's a 5-year window that's going to tier back to 3%. So it's something we want to be mindful of.
Can you just explain what that 5% means?
So it's 5% of your total budget that you can carry over. So if our budget was $100 million, it means we could carry over right now up to 9 million. We had 7.7. But as that tiers out, it can be poor budgeting. It would be reflective of poor budgeting. If you are over the state maximum, you should have reasons as to why.
So that's why a few years ago, it was a big to-do when we had over 9 million in the fund balance. Is that correct?
My guess a few years back, over 9 million would have been
It would have been
probably closer to 10% of your budget. And that, yes, that would be problematic from an auditing process and a state process. It has happened though, and there are some anomalies that pop up. So it's not impossible, but it's not good practice to have that on a regular basis. Other revenue, again, reflects Medicaid reimbursements, facilities rentals, and other reimbursable items. So if you look back on that prior page and you see a jump in revenue under other revenue, you see that 316 and that 535. That's where we start to look at where those additional funds, if they're reimbursed, could come back into our district again as revenue. Next section down, I have proposed items that came to Karen and I and our team, and This is not all, this is not a total inclusive, thorough list. These are just some highlights. And I'll note that in the spots where we say multiple, that could have been 8 or 10 or 12 positions, because each school wanted 1 or 2 or 3, especially at the elementary level. But these are things that are not in the budget that, because of the criteria we set when we started this budget, knowing the constraints of our community and the times that we're living in, we wanted to be smart and say, there are just some things that we cannot do in our local budget. If you see an item that has a star on it, it means that item is currently being paid for with ESSER funds. I think that's important for you to know that those things are still happening. But when those funds sunset, it either gets picked up locally or it stops. One of those items is summer school. Yeah.
What is the cutoff? I know there's different cutoff dates for the funding. What is the time limit on them? When are they sunsetting?
Yeah, there are different ones. We have a big one in the fall of 23. And then we have some others that can be encumbered, and they extend a little bit longer, but it's not a whole lot. Do you happen to?
Yeah, so ESER 1, our first ESER grant, which none of these positions are in, will end this coming September. The grant that most of these positions are in will be the end of the 23 school year, and then so the end of next year, and
Like
then
June of 24.
what are we in now? 22. It'll be the end of the next school year, so the 22-23 school year.
So around the summer of 2024 is when they'll end.
No, the
Spring.
so August of 23.
So,
22,
yeah, it's-
23. So, okay, August is 23.
Yeah,
So we had the positions we will have had the positions for 2 years. We had them this current school year, and we'll be able to fund them for next year. But after that, we will not have the funding.
Okay, thank you.
And that's everything with a star next to it?
Correct. And then we have
So,
another big.
yeah, just to be clear, everything with a star on it were things that people wanted to put in our local budget that I said no to, or that as a team we said no to. There is a much bigger list in totality that they didn't, that our building leaders didn't ask to put in local. They would like to, but I told them at the outset, do not ask me to put positions in this budget that you can't find a way to pay for. Like if you have 2 open ed tech positions, you want to talk about a teacher, let's have a conversation. If you don't have that, don't bring that right now. We don't have room in this budget, as you can see. And so we can get you a comprehensive or a more comprehensive, we actually have spreadsheets on it, but we can give you a comprehensive list of what is in each of those funds. And we also, for very deliberate reasons, based on timeframes and how the money became available and the rules for spending it, because every single grouping was different, put like facilities and HVAC and mechanical upgrades in one of the ESSER funds more heavily, and the other one is more instructional, teacher, student support in the other ESSER fund. But again, when we look up in 12 months, we will be staring the end of that funding right in the face. It'll go through next school year. I want to be clear. So when you see these reductions or these stars or items that are not on here, we're okay for next year. I think there's 2 purposes for putting these items in. One is people felt strongly enough for them to say, you know, we really need this in our school. But we said not in the general fund because it would be, again, someone's going to pay for these positions.
And I want to clarify, when these positions were hired for, the people that are in those positions, we were very clear that they were only 2-year positions. So they're not, we didn't give false hope that they were positions that would last forever. Now, we would love for that to be the case, but we were very clear that they were 2-year positions funded by that grant.
Do we have any data on the success of these programs? I mean,
We do.
I know that's a
and
loaded question. but-
We do, and we can bring more things back to you.
Okay.
And I just rounding out a number, you know, when we look at like, for example, on here, I have it scrolled down to SEL positions, which has been reported by many as hugely resourceful in our schools. You have an adult or others just dedicated to SEL or restorative practices, just additional people that can help kids grow their coping skills and do some teaching and learning around that. Every principal I spoke to wants to keep that position. Every single one. Now, in a district of our size, you're talking somewhere between 8 and 10 people at a minimum. And that's, Bill, do you recall what we're using for just a flat number? If we add a teacher position, what's our $80,000 per person, as we consider salary. We're not sure where they'll land on the scale, and also their benefits. So when you hear teacher, think roughly $80,000. Some of our currently employed teachers make less than that by contract and don't take benefits. And then we have some very high on the scale who take advantage of all the benefits. So it's kind of a wash number.
My other question on this list is, are we going to get a breakdown of what every single thing on this list is? Because I'm not familiar with everything on this list.
We can do that. I'm comfortable with that. I
Okay.
guess I also want to point out these are things that are either in ESER or didn't make this budget at all. So these are items that are already out of this total. So if we wanted to put something back or know more about it, we can certainly do that. Would it be beneficial if I took a minute right now to just give a light skim over what these are? I can do that. Sure. So instructional interventionists, these are people who do targeted level support with students, teaching and learning, helping students with reading, with specific math deficits. The beauty of interventionists is we use research proven programs and we want to grow that capacity. So we have a student, we know they cannot read in 4th grade, 5th grade. We were doing reading interventions with grant money at the middle school when I was there, 7th grade students who struggle to read and comprehend. And you just see a change in students when they develop that skill. And obviously, the famous quote in education, at least for me, is from 0 to 3rd grade, you learn to read. And then from 3rd grade, somehow in the mix of that year and beyond, you read to learn. It's often why we see some behaviors develop in 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, because students fall back academically, and this is how they show their value to others. And interventionists can really help with that. The Boost program is really a wraparound after-school program, actually functions here. So they have after school, they do activities, enrichment, socialization, coping strategies, school routines, tutoring, academic support. So it's almost like a summer school after school, and students stay later and they get bused home.
I'm sorry, can I just ask on the Boost program,
Sure.
how is that different than 21st Century?
It's a good question.
Want me to explain?
Yeah.
So
I-
21st century, we have some very specific areas of things that kids have to experience. And with the Boost program, we don't, it's our own program in terms of we set those expectations. And so students in 21st century, there's a certain amount of time that's academic, a certain amount of time that's enrichment, a certain amount of time that's physical activity. With the Boost program, it's within the school here at Connors, and a student might just attend for an academic reason. They might attend just for an enrichment. They might attend for both. They might have an opportunity to do both. So and it may be a longer duration. 21st century is usually all year long. A student attends 21st century all year long, whereas the Boost program might just be a student attends for a certain session. So that's the easiest way to explain it.
I'd just add a little, 21st Century is a grant that we get awarded, and then we have to follow the criteria of that grant. Boost, it has that bit of a crossover, like Karen said, we own it, we can do what we wish with it, but that's really targeted needs. So we would say to, I'll give you an example, my son who was involved with Boost-like program years ago, he was struggling with reading, that was identified. And his team of teachers and administration said, we have this after school opportunity. We could find a way to make it work. He went and he did reading specific development twice a week, and he went home. And so that's one of the differences in that. Just sliding down, security cameras in some locations to give you more information on the sum. Many schools would like to have more cameras. We are in a camera install process right now, and that's progressing. But we also have schools that do not have cameras. And so some of those schools we're curious about that. Reading recovery positions, I'll default to Karen on some of these. She explains them pretty well.
So reading recovery teachers are very similar to the instructional interventionists that Jake was referring to. But a reading recovery teacher is a trained teacher in a specific intervention or set of interventions. And reading recovery is a one-on-one or a tier 3, which is the highest level of an intervention. A student who might be struggling or falling below their peers. And it's a one-on-one intervention, research-based intervention. That's about an 18-week intervention, intense intervention. So we have some folks in reading recovery positions in our Title I budget that have already been trained and are doing that job. Due to the pandemic and a need, schools asked for additional reading recovery positions, and we were able to train those folks and put them in these positions for the 2 years. So the positions that are referred to on this list are just those positions that are in the emergency relief funds, not the positions that are in our Title I grant. So just to clarify, I don't want people to think that it's all of them. It's a handful that were in that ESA grant.
And in grades 7 through 12, classically trained teachers get zero instruction or experience in learning around how to do reading recovery, because by the time you get students in 7th plus grade, the theory is you're not teaching them reading specific skills. And we've come to learn that is very much not the case for our students.
I'm so sorry. I'm just so full of questions. My mind's just, the reading recovery positions, is that something that our coaches could do, our literacy coaches?
Most of our literacy coaches, with the exception of a couple because they're new, have been trained in reading recovery or a version of reading recovery, and they do provide some one-on-one interventions within that model as part of their job.
All right, sliding down. Multiple requests for additional administration. I would say every school asked for 1, 2, or both things. One was to have an additional administrator or a dean-like position. And then part 2 was around special education supervisors being assistant principals because of the nature of the work that they're already doing, that they're picking up so many things like other assistant principals do. So there's a conversation around the special ed supervisor piece that will be coming your way in our special ed presentation. But we denied additional administration at this time. There's a request for an attendance and family engagement coordinator. They found some success. Some schools are using their SEL staff to do some of this outreach. And particularly at some of the elementary schools, they found success with that, so much so that they actually felt like every school should have a person who does this truancy, this go to the house, say, hey, why aren't you coming to school? What's the problem? How do we get you there? And while I think that's incredibly meaningful and valuable, I don't see how it fits into our budget constraints.
Megan, you had a question?
So just to clarify on the special education thing, you said they were all denied admin. So does that mean the thing that I asked before? Am I allowed to say that?
You say anything you want.
So does that mean like when it comes to special education, there's potential for admin positions in the special education?
Yeah, so that's part of the presentation is we're looking at our structure systemically. I think it's going to invite a conversation with stability and also and different roles and responsibilities that we want some of our supervisors to have. The challenge to that is obviously to create stability, and having those responsibilities requires compensation. So that will be part of our presentation from the structure perspective. The SEL positions, which we've talked about, but essentially you have someone who's full-time in that school doing social emotional learning with kids, hot spots, helping kids return back to class, keeping them moving and coping strategy. When we talked a few meetings ago about the ruler, working with Yale, mood meter, meta moment, all of those pieces, being your best self, that's all part of the SEL work. The ELMS positions, it's currently in ESER, that's why it's got a star. This went really well in year one of the pandemic. We were so short-staffed this year, we couldn't even hire it. And right now that we're going back to more traditional in-person, we've been in person all year, but we're seeing that that's not something we want to include in our general fund. It did not run this year, I guess is important to say. Additional deans, which I mentioned already. Summer SRO requests. So right now, our school resource officers, they work the school year, and then they go to patrol in the summer and operate on whatever their chief or sergeant asked them to do. Our summer school numbers, especially in areas for remediation, have grown so much that schools feel like it might be good to have someone available in the building to continue to build relationships with students and to be around. Summer school coordinator, I believe this was at the middle school, and it was essentially you have your administrative team working really hard in the summer to plan the next school year, but summer school has gotten so big, it's like the year never stopped, and you don't have an opportunity to ramp up for the next year because you're running summer school. I know I lived that myself. I know Karen lived it because she taught me some of those ropes when I took her spot many years ago at the middle school. It's a full-time gig when you have 200, 300, 400 students attending summer school and you have a diminished staff. You're very light across the building, and someone's got to be there doing that work. Various school counselors, multiple schools requested to grow the number of school-based counselors that they have. These are more programmatic, so this is not a therapist. I just want to be clear. This is more programmatic, but again, they're there for students to help guide them and nurture them through the process of school. And our counts in our district historically have been high. I think this committee's done a good job over the years of adding several throughout the district. And so that was some of my thinking. A curriculum coordinator, this was a school-based position. The request was at the high school to really help with someone that would specifically be working in the curriculum-based areas within the high school itself. And I denied that because we have other district resources that can carry out that work, especially once we're through this pandemic. Let's see here. Multiple facility staff, a very reasonable request. Director Bro asked for, I believe it was 4 positions, some custodians, some more facilities and maintenance. Last year, we did add some positions, but they are, some of them local, some of, I believe one custodian ended up being local to help with the expansion at the high school. And we also have an additional facilities maintenance person. That one, I believe, is an ESER. Additional technology staff. Dave and his team now are running a district that is currently 1-to-1. Every student has a device. On top of that, there are labs and carts and software. And I don't want to start with the to-do list, but it wouldn't be irrational to have additional technology staff. RTI teachers, so that's response to intervention. Karen mentioned the tier 3, so there's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. And I'll probably get these ratios wrong, but essentially tier 1, the intent is if you have a good teacher doing good instruction, they're going to reach about 80% of the kids. It should just happen. They may reach more, but looking at a pyramid, they'll reach 80% of their kids. And then tier 2, like the next part of that triangle, if you think of it that way, that middle stretch being colored in, about 15% of your kids, they need more, but it's not necessarily really excessive. It might be a little more instruction. It might be help closing some gaps, and then they can return and everything's fine. Then you have tier 3, and these are kids that really benefit from intensive supports. This is that one-on-one piece that might go a longer duration. This is that resource room type approach, and others. So that's what RTI is. So these people would be going around doing different levels of intense, individualized or small group supports for instruction. These are things that teachers cannot do when they have 22 students in their classroom. And so that's part of that thinking.
I have a question.
Sure.
Is that the one that works with the restorative justice group?
No, so restorative justice is separate of the response to intervention. Yeah, it's a good question though, because there's responsive
Right.
pieces to the restorative practice. So the words are almost
Okay.
identical.
All
Yep.
right. Thank you.
Can I
Um,
just add, Dave?
sure.
The RTI teachers and the interventionists sometimes are interchangeable. And in some schools, the RTI teachers currently are more focused on the interventions around behavior. So a little bit different than the SEL folks, the social emotional folks, but more around behavior. And the interventionists, the academic interventionists are more geared toward that academic side. So sometimes you'll hear interventionist or RTI teacher be used interchangeably, and they in a high level, they function in the same way, but depending on the role at each school or the need of each grade level, they might be slightly different.
Apologize. Increase in restorative practice staff that came up in nearly all our schools, just again to add capacity for teaching those skills, growing those skills. Some of the SEL roles have kind of morphed back and forth between intervention, teaching coping strategies, and restorative work. But we did have a number of specific requests for additional restorative practice staff. After school programming, staff materials, there's some big things there. LRTC had requested an additional exploration instructor, but this would be an unsubsidized position, so it would be just a straight pay for us locally. Everyone in this room knows how I feel about LRTC and the hands-on experience of our students. Fully support it, but in this budget, I couldn't do it. Summer school, staff and materials. It's a big one, and if we are. My real fear with summer school, and I'll be honest with you, is we use ESSER funds this year, and that's okay. 12 months from now, we're not planning a summer school unless we find some pot of money through a grant or something like that. We won't be able to transport kids. We won't be able to buy materials. We won't be able to pay staff. That's a big piece that we were very hesitant to move to ESSER last year. But when the budget got so big, we had no way to pay for it.
I haven't had any experience at summer school, so I just have a couple questions about it. Do you offer summer school at every single school separately?
Yes, so some of our summer school is through the 21st Century
Mhm.
grant, and some of our summer school experiences are beyond that. So like at the high school, for example, or at the middle school, it's beyond 21st Century. 21st Century is available, but it's very much about recovering credits. It's about getting, catching up on things that have not been done over more of a true summer school experience.
Mhm.
And I'll use Montello as an example. Montello runs a program that's not related to 21st Century. That's more of a, what's the word I'm looking for? It's to extend their learning and to give them some enrichment opportunities with some academics involved. And then we have those experiences happening at other schools as well in conjunction with the 21st Century program, which is similar to what I just explained about the after school programming for 21st Century. So we have a variety of things happening. The middle and high school is more of a credit recovery experience, whereas at the elementary level, it's more of a expanding their experiences and continuing to give them some academics.
So I guess my question is there a way to kind of restructure summer school? Maybe at the middle and high school level, have it just be, I know we hate online, but just have it be online credit recovery, and then possibly pick one building like Connors that is air conditioned and take our neediest kids in the district and, do a 4-week program just here. Like, is there a way to restructure this and find a way that would work that might save us some money, and that way we don't have to ditch it all together?
I think we have to look at every option. I think because we have Easter funds, we haven't had to look at that. And again, we're okay for this summer. And it'll be a year out, but I think that all of those things will need to be explored. The hard thing with online, I think for the kids that missed a thing that are capable, totally, I get it. There's a lot of kids who, for credit recovery perspective, they miss standards because they don't understand. And the online component, maybe through Zoom, that could be helpful. It gets cumbersome, but I'm also getting worried about the, not so much the high school cost, because I think we'll stay there, but the elementary cost for devices and the software is massive. And I don't know that it's something that we'll be able to maintain unless, again, additional funding becomes available, which is possible. Dave is really good at actually finding additional funding sources, but I worry about the sustainability of technology in the younger grades. I think our middle and high school kids need it. And I don't think this is a conversation this year. I don't even think it's a conversation next year, maybe not even the year after, because of the team, the work that Dave and his team have done. But I think that kind of went off to the side there, but I think that technology is going to be a conversation down the road.
The high school was virtual. It's our school last year.
How successful was that?
All on-site. And to be honest with you, we've done a really good job of grading funds, like Title I reallocation. Title I money that doesn't get utilized by district goes back out from the state, and we grab chunks of that every year to also support summer school and all of that. So there's lots of layers, and go after whatever we can. Because it's a lot of kids. And even if they're not needy academically, having some place to go during the summer that has structure and is a safe place is also something that's important for a lot of our students.
Yes, Linda.
I want to make sure that we keep this summer school conversation right up front. I mean, even before COVID, we know that we had a lot of high school kids that needed that credit recovery. That is a crucial piece. And it would be a crucial piece in looking at our graduation rate, right? Which is a conversation that everybody seems to have in the community, and the importance of that. We all know the importance of it, but it is a piece that everybody looks at and helps build. It is all part of the economic development of our community, having people live here, that's a whole piece in that. And I find it very concerning, and I think it's unfortunate. I understand why you had to use some of the emergency funding for that, but that was all put towards that, and now we're looking at the possibility of losing that is, I'm not happy about that. Got to be honest with it.
On the whole, maintain or not fall back as far with their reading development through all of these programs. And even maintaining for a student who's not struggling is important. They're going to wind up in credit recovery down the line if we're not consistently sort of offering these opportunities. So by far the largest summer school program in the state. So yeah, and I hear your concerns about it's tough to finance. But it would be really worth looking hard at how we can maintain it as much as possible.
Do we have a sense of how many students are involved in summer school? Over 1,000?
Over 1,000.
Yeah, I think you push between 600 and 800 just at the middle and high school alone. Not counting the 5 elementary schools.
Linda, I think you asked about the success of the online summer school at the high school. The beauty of our summer school at the high school over the last few years is that we no longer require kids to sit for 4 to 5 weeks in the classroom to review, to take a whole class over again, right? We use our standards and look at what standards students met and did not meet to pass the course. And so a student only needs to sit, if you will, or do the work on the standards that they have missed. So because of that, I think the online piece was probably more successful than an online summer program in any other place, because students knew they only had to sit in front of the computer or do the work remotely on certain pieces of the coursework. We could definitely get you some more data about, the completion of that and how many students were successful and all of that. I know the high school has that information, but in general, because that's the way we've gone about it, I think the online piece wasn't quite as, it worked better at that place at the high school than it would or did in other places.
It's amazing how, especially upper grade students, 11 and 12, get really motivated when they know they just have a few things they have to do, how quickly they will focus and get those few things done so they can enjoy their summer. Okay, let's see here. 21st century local commitment. Really what that is when we receive the 21st century grant, or actually when we apply, we bring it before the committee so that you're fully aware of what we're applying for and how that is structured. But we have requirements, so we have to pay for certain pieces of it. We might pay for some of the staff in a grant. We might pay for the transportation or a piece of it in some of these grants. I don't know if you want to add to that, Karen, but essentially that's on us. But the amount of money that comes in and the program we can provide is really a cost benefit opportunity.
But this is on the list for cuts, so can we still get the grant if we don't provide certain things?
So this is starred. So this is being taken care of in ESER.
Yeah, I'm thinking about in the future.
So a year from now, we'll be having
Okay.
a very serious conversation.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so this comment is political in nature, but I feel like it applies just because it's something that I've heard and it's in the works. I did sit down and listen to former Governor Paul LePage speak about education, and one of his suggestions, one of the things he really wants to put into play if he's elected in November is after school childcare, more or less, for all students K-6, I believe, and adding that funding into the budget for each school to have people after school. So if something like that were to happen, it could fix some of these needs that we need. So I just wanted to put that piece out there that I've been listening to information about that, and I think it sounds really appropriate for what we're talking about right now. So
Yeah, we've heard the potential for both younger children and some aftercare things. We've even had some light conversations internally of what might we do if we had the facility to provide daycare and a student learning experience for our staff, and having students involved in a program to help facilitate or run it. We have communities not too far away, one across the river, that provides daycare for some of their staff in their facility. And I think that could be a really good attractant. But yes, to that point, education funding is almost an intuitive feel to it, and I will say at times. So when these ESER funds start to dry out, there will be a sense in both federal and state governments that districts went one-to-one. They're not going to be able to sustain those computers on their own. So we either need to ramp up the commercial world or provide federal funding to maintain it, or a decision will be made to say essentially it's up to the local. Things like after school or things that are costly, things that you see on this list, the federal government knows exactly what's on these lists because we have to submit it all and get it approved in advance. And then we have to, whenever we modify it, they have to approve those pieces. So people know the things that we have moved to these areas because we don't know how to otherwise fund them. So I'm hopeful that, kind of like you mentioned with the aftercare program, there's an intuitive sense out there that when we look up in a year, we may have access to funding. Problem is, we may not. We'll certainly know more as we approach that timeframe. Jumpstart program, staff and materials. I mean, Kara can speak to that. That's more of a preemptive effort, but
So we talked about Boost, the Boost program, which is specific to Connors. That's a program they created. Jumpstart is the program at McMahon that is specific for our younger learners, K1 and 2. And what they have done over I think last year, they may have done it the year before as well. They give those students a jump start. They bring them back to school. They give them some opportunities to get familiar with school again. This was particularly important last year when some kids had not been in school all that often. They get to know the school. They get to know, the layout, the teachers. And then they also do some jump starting of some academics as well. So it's another summer program that was created at an individual school that's not tied to the 21st Century program or other summer school programs we've had in the past.
we've had things in the past, even at different levels. High school, for example, doing a jumpstart program with incoming freshmen to teach them things that they're going to be taught as freshmen. So they kind of get a preemptive exposure to standards and topics before they go into the high school level. We don't do that program currently, but it's those kinds of things. I put here and others due to our internal approach. And I want to, for any of our members of management, our directors, Dave being a director of technology, the work they did this year in the budget is absolutely something that could be applauded. This was not an easy process. They know the needs. They're doing the work. They're on the ground. They know the needs. And they were told that there's really no room in this budget cycle for additions. And so, again, I applaud them. They'll find a way to make what they can work. And there'll be some things we just won't be able to do. All right, sliding down. In addition to these unfulfilled requests, we've reduced 18 vacant special education positions from the budget. That's a big number. That's 18 positions that we have taken out of this budget. We continue to carefully review our special education staffing with Director Crafts, and we may be able to further reduce positions as we move through the budget process. And again, we've continued to, as these positions come up in our research, we just want to make sure we're verifying at the school level and at the IEP level. Are we still compliant? Are we actually able to reduce this? Kirsten feels that there may be some more positions, but she wants to verify them before we put them before you. She has already verified these 18 positions. Some of the special education conversation is to use some of this vacant positions that we've reduced as part of the structural changes. Any additional positions that are found in special education or elsewhere would again add to that list of reductions.
Jake, are these 18 positions, these are full-time special ed teachers, or can also be ed techs?
They are almost all ed techs. I believe there were one or two teachers. These are vacant positions that, because of programming shifts and student enrollments, we've been able to realize that some were not needed to begin with, and the rest are not currently needed because of enrollments.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, under the DOJ thing, there was actually a recommendation to reduce a significant number of ed techs, but to add 11 new positions, which I think we authorized. So are those 11 positions that we authorized are still back in, and these 18 are outside of that request?
Yeah, from that perspective, if we talked about those 11 and these 18, you'd be talking about 29 positions that of those, the 11 that were put in years past budget are large in part staffed and doing what they should be doing. These positions, what we're finding through the good work of Bill and Adam, there's something to do with the rollover process. I don't want to go too deep in the weeds, but for example, when the budget was moved in years past, you take a prior it's a massive database that goes from one place to another. And then when you hire vacant positions, there's some curiosity because of the level of software that we're almost done using because we're upgrading, that there's a question about, was the vetting process in the business office happening in our special education office happening? For example, when I was a high school principal, I get a position list and I had to review it and then send it back. There's an error here that's actually open. This person left. This is actually filled. Just kind of a checks and balances. Well, if that's not being done properly in the business office or in a specific area, you could have vacancies that exist that the business office believes should be there. So they roll it forward, or it's been relayed to them that it shouldn't be there and it never gets taken out. So it rolls forward. And I think that's how we end up with many of these unfilled vacancies that the auditors found, that the DOJ talked about, that you're resourced, but you're resourced in the wrong places. And in some places you have way too much. And I think we know we have structural needs in special education. But we're finding a lot of things that do not need to be there while still being able to meet the needs of students. And I mentioned the 18 that's already been pulled from this particular budget again. But when I mentioned that these things are not mutually exclusive, some of these 18 or a good portion of this 18 is extracted by those ed tech and teacher positions. They may have been inserted elsewhere in the budget to maintain a certain level of something else in the structure, which will be part of our presentation. But we're going to itemize for you what that was and what it was not. So we're not doing smoke and mirrors. We're not saying we cut 18 positions, but really we put the money over here. We don't do that. We're not going to do that. So we'll be upfront with you about what that looks like. We talked pretty extensively about the extended school year and the extended school day, but I do want to mention that we have summer school costs that are specific to special education. That is in, but that was a putback. That was not in the current cycle. We used ESSER funds, and this year we're putting that back in the budget. Health insurance and benefits. The vast majority of this category includes health insurance. Our premium levels for 22-23 will not be known until the end of March. This happens every year. This is not an anomaly. The MEA Benefits Trust works with providers, and there's a whole set of work that's happening right now. We budgeted 12% for insurances. Last year, we had a 0% increase. The year before that, it was either 0 or very small. It was very small. Here's the problem with that. I don't know if anybody knows someone in insurance. I don't mean to be insulting. Insurance companies don't go too long without raising premiums. And so having had a small, and I mean very small, it was like, I think 4% or less, and then a 0% increase. And just to give you a frame of reference, some districts have seen numbers as high as 14%. They don't know those numbers yet. This is in the past. So we're hopeful to have something in the mid-range, not too big. We budget 12%. What happens with that is if it comes in at less than 12%, we'll go to task and give you that number. That actually happened last year. I think we had budgeted 6 or 8%, and it came in at 0. So we were able to grab that money, and well, we wanted to pull it out and some of it went back in. But to me, I would say if we come in under the 12, that we try to exercise the discipline to reduce our budget. But that could come in at 12, it could come in at 13, we're at the mercy of that information that comes to us typically by the end of March.
And 12% of the health insurance number is a huge number.
It's a massive number. I say later, and I'll probably say it again, but our staff and benefits represent 66% of our budget. So when we talk about really hard cuts, it's not long before we start talking about people. And so knowing that so much of our budget is staff and their benefits, it's a very costly item. Transportation, just a couple notes in here that our contract with Student Transportation of America, or if you hear my phone calls, STA, That's Hudson. That's who we contract with. I would like to reiterate to all of those out there who want to hear it that the bus drivers are contracted. They're not Lewiston Public Schools employees. We work closely with them, but we have a contract. That contract's going up. It's a 3-year contract. It was signed last year. So that's just contractual. But also wanted to make a mention in here, and we'll talk about it some more when we talk about special education and that mutually exclusive or give and take scale process. What we spend to transport our special populations is unimaginable. And much of that cost is these outplacements because we can't serve them at home. So if we can find a way, we did a rough cost benefit analysis, and we were somewhere around 10 or 11 kids that if we could have them served in our district, we would save all of the cost to send them elsewhere and some. What it costs to provide it, staff, spaces, supplies, all of that. Sliding down, adult education, when you look at your articles sheet, if you look at it closely, you don't have to look at it closely right now, but when you do, adult education is not on that. Again, that's the state article funding formula. And so we do have adult education costs. They are very efficient. I don't know how they do what they do with the budgets that they maintain, but they've proposed or projected a flat programmatic budget. The only increases they have are contractual hourly rates or someone getting a step or things like that. So they've come in very, very inexpensive. So here I want to get into the reduction factoring, and I'm using some of what Heather talked about the other day, some familiarity from past, and to try to give you a frame of reference too. Because the taxpayers in our community, I think, have been very supportive of education. We have to be realistic about the constraints that we have with what people are able to contribute and the level of need that we have. But to that point, Heather shared that an increase of $21,000 equals approximately 1 cent. So 1 penny. So if you start to think about what would this save, what would this cost, you can start to use $21,000 as a divisor. But to give you an idea of what we're talking about, for example, you can see that $2.1 million represents $1 on the mill rate. So if you feel like this proposal in a tax format, once we have more details on the tax rate or the mill rate, is $1 too high, that means your goal is to reduce by $2.1 million. If it's $2, it's 4.2. If it's $3, it grows. And you can see last year we did get into penny conversations on the overall mill rate. And you can see that $1.05 million is 50 cents and $525,000 is 25 cents. I mentioned here again that staff and benefits represent approximately 66% of our budget. It's a really massive number. Put it in bold. I probably could have capitalized it. I feel like I'm yelling when I do, so I don't. But we have work to do. But we were deliberate about this process so that we weren't creating lists to just add at the end and have too big a number to bring to the city council. I look forward to this work. It's hard work. I love this stuff. You probably think I'm crazy, but going back many years, Bruce, Tanya, Megan, Linda, who have been at many committee meetings going back a decade. I sat in these meetings even as an administrator. I think it's an important process. It's critical to our kids, but we have to be mindful of the constraints of our fiscal constraints. I did include an enrollment summary below just so you could see that. But that's just a listing of our numbers there by school and by grade. And the number that matters from a subsidy perspective is that bottom right total. And we're healthy there. I don't have concerns there. Last year, again, we were down 300, and the concern was, what if that jumps to 500? And what if kids just go to school online and don't return to school? So we've been fortunate this year. Some schools are really struggling with their enrollment numbers. Question?
Yeah, what's Team Purple?
That is one of the teams at the high school.
It was Star Academy? Okay, but it's housed at the high school?
Yep,
Okay.
yep. So it's one of the freshman teams.
Why is that one singled out?
It's a functional power school because they use a different block schedule. And so when you change or their bell schedule, when you modify the bell schedule, it gets this new designation in the student information system. That's really the big part of it. They have some longer lab periods and they have instruction in each content on a daily rotation instead of a multi-day rotation. So it's a little more supportive in its nature. Anything else on the overview? So kind of a what happens next. Before we switch agenda items, we'll talk about the ED 279 and we'll just, again, I'm going to do an overview. I don't know that it's something that you have to memorize or digest too greatly this time around, but it's good to know how the state comes up with this number and how it all filters through. And the ED 279 is all about revenue. That's that money coming to our district, whether it's reimbursement or upfront or whatever. That's that state subsidy piece coming in. And then when you look at the things that we want to do, the staff we want to pay for, those are our expenditures. So I can sometimes get locked in the language and you might have to just ask me to pause at different times in the budget process to say, are you talking about this or that? Or tell me what you're talking about. Because I will jump in revenues to expenditures all the time. But what happens at the end of all this, no matter what we do, that revenue line, how much money comes from the state, how much we're asking from the taxpayer, how much we're projecting in facilities rentals, and our expenditures on the other side of the table, we're paying for bus contract, we're paying for teachers, we're paying for pencils and paper. Those numbers have to equal. That's how we get to a balanced budget and our approved budget. If they're off, it means we've overtaxed, we've undertaxed, we've done something wrong. So I will constantly, in my mind, be thinking about that $21,000 because every time we say we want to spend $21,000 and that's a penny, that's an expenditure. That's how much we spent. That's the money going out. I'll be thinking in my head, how are we getting $21,000 to come in to pay for it? And if we used all of our state subsidy and those other sources, it's a tax bill. And so those numbers will balance. So when we talk revenue, that's money coming in and we can't spend more than's coming in.
So I think we'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and we'll dive into the minutia of the ED.
ED 279, Essential Program and Services.
We'll get back at it again. Dave, you all set to go? Okay, thank you, Dave.
All right, so you have a handout that is incredibly exciting to look at. I want to break down, sometimes, member Bopal might appreciate this. Sometimes when you digest a text, you should understand the structure of the text a little bit before you go diving in. This is a 6-page document. If you look closely about here, you'll see that it says section 1. Each of these pages actually represents a different section. So if you get to the bottom of page 1 and you think you're starting to understand, remember that you're about to change sections. The first time I read this about 14 years ago, I went right through it and I said, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I didn't realize there were sections, and it doesn't make sense if you don't realize it. So the other thing you'll see, just kind of walking through this, top left, you see org ID. Org and ID and object and code. These are all kind of the state article accounting terms. So you might hear at some point, we'll turn and we'll ask a question over there, and Bill and Adam speak in this language. Karen does a little bit as well. I've got some memorized, but not quite like them. But you might hear things like, oh, that's 05-10-10. And in their heads, that means something specific. I actually knew that one. That's why I used it. 05-10-10 is salary. So if you're trying to find out, hey, how much are we paying in salaries at a specific school, you can not exact, but you can go get a rough estimate. The hard thing with these systems is, just so you understand, you look at things like, we actually discussed this today for one example. We looked at some of the salary costs, and we were trying to narrow the scope of the old, the new, the difference in cost and all of that. And you can't just go to 05-10-10 and have it be all of that, because 05-10-10 also includes things like college tuition reimbursement. So you might have a salary cost, but then you got to go by an individual person, and it may not indicate it in that one report. So you might actually have to go like at a pay stub and figure out if they've ever had a reimbursement compared to where they are in the contract. And then you have to figure out if that reimbursement was college tuition based or extra work or other. So when we dig, it gets complex in a hurry. So you can have multiple things in one of those codes. But going back to here, the other thing you'll see is you have obviously have rows left, right in the shaded area and the non-shaded area. And you also have the columns. I wish they broke out the columns well, because you have these little charts at the top, and then they break out into A, B, C, D, and E on this section 1. So kind of look at section 1 first, I think would be a good way to go. I'm not going to do this for the whole document. Just want to give you kind of a starter. So in section 1, you see computation of EPS rates. And then part A, attending counts. So you see attending pupils October 2020, and then you see attending pupils October 2021. In my world, those are big numbers, because they are important numbers. The attendance counts, that's your enrollment count. So when we talked about how many kids come to our school in subsidy, that's where this plays in. We report those on October 1st and again in April. It takes a lot of reporting, a lot of vetting, a lot of qualifying. So it's a big process, but that's how we get to that space. The state will audit that process, and every student has a student ID. So if we claim a kid in our report, it's also claimed in hypothetical Brunswick, they'll flag us. And then we got to call Brunswick and say, do you have this kid? Because we got him at Montello, but you're saying you have him. And then, well, they lived here last year and they moved. It's a correction. With 5,000 plus students, it's a cumbersome process, but important. You also see, if you slide to the right, pre-K to K, 1 to 5, 6 through 8. Those are your ages. And then you get an equals. So what they're doing is they're qualifying separately each of those 3 categories, but then they're giving you a total, but it's only a pre-K to 8 total. Pre-K to 8 funding has its own rules. Then you have 9 through 12, and then you have a total. 9 through 12 through the funding formula has different subsidy. So they break it out and then they put it together. So then you get into what someone has decided through good process typically, what the ratio should be for your enrollments. So forget that you live here or anywhere else at this point in the EPS formula. This is just student count and teacher ratio or other guidance librarians, health teachers. Actually, is it health teacher? Or is that nurse, Karen? Might be nurse. Clerical, school admin, library techs. So those are the different categories. And what they're saying in this, if you look at the very top one, teachers, they're saying from the pre-K to K, EPS, Essential Programs and Services, FTE is full-time employee, 39. And the student to staff ratio, they're pulling from the numbers they get from the enrollment report, 15:1. So they're saying that in Lewiston Public Schools, for teachers, you should have a 15:1 ratio according to the budget, according to their formulation of the budget. I can throw 30 different curveballs at you as to why that number may not fit one community versus another, but this is how distribution plays. So this first section is all about the calculation for funding based on these ratios and the percentages. And they break it down in categories. So A is your accounting, your attending, B, staff positions, and then C is a computation of benefits. So they have projections for how much benefit should be for each of those people, again, based on the salaries that they've included. Then you get into other support per pupil cost. So I'm looking at D on the left-hand side here. And then you get into subs, PD, so other components of our budget, operations, maintenance, all these other areas that are essential to running schools, they prorate and estimate what they think, given the available money and the state allocation, and they're looking at the enrollment for the state. So how much money is there? How many kids are there everywhere? And that's how they start to determine these formulas. Then you get to, you see E, you see regional adjustment for staff and substitute salaries. So the regional adjustments are dictated by them. That's one of those areas that I've always felt is like the magic ratio area component, but
Less than one number good for us or not so good for us?
where are you looking?
Start regional index.
The 0.98?
Yeah.
That just means that from I mean, it's better to be higher. Yeah.
Is one of the highest or is?
No, you'll see how I don't know about the regional index, if it goes higher than one, but there are other areas of ratio where you see far greater. So this page one, this section one is like that really overview of no detail, no specifics, just what we think. By we, I mean the state thinks using their formulas. If we go to section 2, you start looking at the subsidizable items and how some of the basic counts and the weighted counts break down. This is where you get into different targeted funds. So what are some of the demographics of your community and how does that play into the level of need? And then you start seeing things rated in a way, again, broken down. But in this particular page, you see that 4-year-old piece. That's that CDS law that came in a few years back that works with 4-year-old students who have some needs in transition. So you start to see the formulas based in there. When you see EPS weights, I'm looking at essentially this kind of middle almost stretch. And some things have weights and some things do not. That's just the weight of that formula. And you can see the allocations. If you look at the very bottom right of page 2, you see the totals for the operating allocation. You see $50 million there. Okay, so that's how those two build together. But if you remember, we have 66. So where's the rest? Question?
So looking at C, weighted counts, the weighted cost allocation, is that currently, was that what they recommend?
Yeah, so this is using the October enrollment counts.
Yep.
And their weighted ratios to determine what they anticipate giving us in subsidy next school year.
Okay.
Yep, that's a good question.
Thank you.
And that's where we get the FY '23. So 22 is now, which is easier this time of year because it is 22. But next fall, it gets confusing because it's still 22, but really we're in FY '23. So it follows July 1st or June 30th, July 1st instead of school year. Sure.
My question is about weighted counts and sort of what that means. Because these look like small numbers, not, oh no, there's a bigger number. Okay, but I don't know what that means in
So
terms of,
Yeah,
they're taking the number of people you have who are disadvantaged or English language learners, and then the number of them, and then multiplied by a fraction, by decimal, which is, and then times some other number that I don't understand. And then there's a
So
bigger
the-
number. And it's like, what is that? Could
So-
you please explain?
sure. So the weights play into the determinations on page 1. So the
Mhm.
weights are actually, think of it this way as it's a plus for us.
Yes, but
So-
that's why I was wondering why it was 0.5 and not 2.
1.5.
Yeah.
Right. No, I hear what you're saying. And I think it's because they then multiply with the results from page 1.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this is an added half, let's say,
Right.
we're getting, okay, per person.
Sure.
So the stuff that we're looking at right now isn't anything that necessarily the school board needs to know about, except, I mean, to
Sure.
really know, we just need to kind of understand the overall concept,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. This does not dictate decision-making here other than to know this is how we got to 66 million in the subsidy support. But it also is the determination of when they look at the whole, once they've decided what the percentage of the pie you get, that establishes your 55%, and the rest becomes your local share. So I think the more important thing with the EPS or the ED 279 is what are you getting from the state? But also, what are you getting from, or what do they say you should get from local? So there's two variables there that are very, very important. One of the reasons it's important this year is yay for the governor from a perspective of getting to 55%. The problem is the overall allocation in the EPS formula that didn't grow essentially. They gave some more money, but it reduced your local share. Your overall money didn't grow that much. It didn't even grow with inflation, never mind contractual steps and potential insurance increases. That's one of the fundamental issues in school funding. That's not the governor's fault. That's how schools are paid for nationwide. So then we get into, if we go to section 3, you see gifted and talented, special ed, other allocations. But this is all, again, ratios built on enrollments. Part C is your debt service. So when we talk about what debts for what things, you can actually see right here, we're still paying for Farwell, Geiger, and the new pre-K elementary school you're sitting in. And those are in this formula because those are the state projects. And those get weighed into the matrix as well. It doesn't count against us, but it comes out of the new school construction pot. And that's why there's only so many schools being built at any one time, because that's how that's funded. So it's just there from an accounting perspective. It's not a negative impact on us, but it can show up on a debt liability, but we get reimbursed. And you see that number at the 5 million number. But if you want to know what we pay in principal and interest on those projects, you can see that, actually what the state pays on those. So I'm flipping down. I'm actually headed to now section 4, and I know I'm kind of skipping through. I just wanted to give you some sense of it. You get into some municipality factors, and that is where they take this total number, subtract what they have come up with in their ratio, and the total that they think you need to run schools, minus what they're going to give you in subsidy, is what makes the state's recommended local minimum share or local allocation, they call it. So if you look about halfway down on page section 4 to the right, under B, you see 17, 174, 781. That is the minimum required local share. Here's how that's important to us locally. From a tax perspective, that number is smaller this year than it was last year. From a school budget perspective, it is smaller than it was last year. And so that equates into the formula. So some of the state funding went up, but when you see this reduction, it's a bit of a hit. What a subsidized pupil is. You can get into different realms of that, and the slideshow may get into it, but I don't know if we want to dive that deep, but there are different subsidizable pupils that, like, if you, some of the outplaced qualified kids, or some of the other situations where there's maybe additional subsidy because of the level of need that a student has. So when we do our counts, if you will, all these demographics get broken out. Poverty, language learner, special education, all of that demographic gets pushed into this puzzle. And so that's when you get into you actually get more subsidy in the formula to educate a language learning student than you do a non-language learning student because of the additional support needed.
Yes, that's what I was trying to get at.
Sure. Yep. Again, I'm kind of zipping through this. You could spend a day on this. In looking at section 5, you start to see how the numbers go down to the bottom right. One of the things I would like you to see is the star pieces, and it says warrant article. You may not know this. We take care of it on our end, but I work closely with Heather and Kathy Monteo at the city. Once the budget gets through certain processes, we create the warrant article. It's a legal document. Legal reviews it. It needs to match this number. It needs to match the revenue. It needs to match the expenses, the expenditures. It needs to include adult education and other legal factors. And it's all in a spreadsheet. We vet it, legal vets it. It goes to Kathy. That is the referendum. So that's like the spreadsheet side of a referendum. And then when people go to vote on the school budget, actually, if you look, it's posted somewhere as you walk in. I did miss a piece I wanted to share with you. Let me go back. Here's my CTE. Sure. Yes, I'm sorry. That's exactly what I was looking for. So on section 5, it's actually number 6.
Yep.
But when we talk about LRTC, they have their own designated allocation. So our Lewiston Regional Technical Center, which remember is a regional center, we serve all 6 area schools. They get $3.567 million straight subsidy. They have some other funding through Perkins, now 5, it used to be Perkins 4, for equipment, supplies, things like that. So it helps the program stay running with materials. Anything above that is what we'll see here as an increase in our budget. And as a region, we have other benefits, and this is going to come up down the road because EL is building a new high school that may have or will have CTE programming in it. Even though we're the region, this will be a bigger discussion at some point, but by we, I mean Director Callahan and the regional perspective, they will actually control those spots. But there could be financial implications to stand up programs that all the districts are going to have to find a way to stand up together. But we get benefits also in that subsidy, and it helps pay for plowing and heat and whatnot as a center, almost as if it stood on its own. So we have, you may see some hypothetical, let's say you see $100,000 for Article 3, that's a plus. It's beyond this subsidy. I can tell you that as part of the subsidy, it pays for things that would cover in different ways. So that can sometimes come up with, hey, shouldn't other people pay for that? Well, really, we get certain benefits that are not qualified in that same budget line. I have this slideshow. What I'd like to do is share it with you. And if you want to look through it, feel free. If you have questions, once you look through it, bring them up. We can talk about them. But the slideshow gets into more detail. I want to say upfront, though, that these slides came from the Department of Education, and we modified some, pulled some out that we didn't think were relevant to us. But there's a good set of, there's 18 pages of them. So if you want to flip through, we'll make sure you have the chance to see those.
Jake, on section 5, right about in the middle, it says the local share and the state share is showing the state share is 79.11%. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so it is actually Lewiston, because of our demographics and level of need, we get more than the 55% on an annual basis. So that's important to know. So that 79% of our budget is actually state subsidized, and it well exceeds the 55%.
So when we talk about this $82.2 million, that is the budget that we have to work with this year. Is that what that is?
That is specific to these revenues only.
Okay.
There are additional revenues like use of fund balance, like the miscellaneous items. So if you go, I'm going to jump back to the memo.
Mhm.
That when you get into that chart, the
Yep.
description summary. So all of those items on the left-hand side work out as your revenue streams, if you will.
Right, so like the approved last year, I remember it's the 93.3.
93, yeah,
The budget that you're proposing is 101.4, but we want to reduce that.
absolutely.
So if we were to, by some miracle, figure out a way to come in under budget.
It's a tax savings.
It's a tax savings, but not to say that the following year we couldn't.
Well,
know.
I want to be careful with this. It's a
Okay.
tax savings to a point.
Okay,
So you have, when the state says you have the local minimum share, that word minimum is critical. What happens in this state subsidy formula is if we don't raise the minimum, we lose state dollars.
okay, that was my question. Okay,
Yeah. And it's roughly, it's not exactly dollar for dollar. It's more like 1 to 2.
Mhm.
So for every dollar we don't raise locally, the state withholds 2. So it's an impact of $3. It's not exactly 111, but it's more or less that's how it plays out. So for example, if we under raised locally by $1, this whole thing would reduce by 3, because we'd have 1 less local dollar raised, and the state would say, we'll put those $2 elsewhere because you didn't raise the local minimum share. With us, because we get 79% from state, it's a heavier impact here than some other places that don't raise the local minimum, because they're either at or below the 55. So it's a greater impact.
okay, all right.
Oh, massive. Yeah, when you look at a 1 to 2 for a total of 3, it happens very fast. So if we, well, I guess hypothetically, let's say in a really aggressive year and times were great, we could afford it. We under budgeted locally by $1 million, we would lose $3 million in our funding, which is a big chunk. Sure can.
On this page, the section 4, I think it is,
Section 4, yeah.
subsidizable, I'm still on that subsidizable thing.
Yeah.
Percentage of total pupils that are subsidizable, it says 100%. So every single one of our students is subsidizable?
Yeah, because we meet a poverty threshold.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
thank you, that's very
Yeah.
helpful.
Adam or yes.
Oh, is that what that
Yeah.
is? It's only about lunch?
Well, the qualifier for free lunch is poverty level.
Right,
Well,
but I mean, the
that language is shifting.
subsidizable, what subsidizable is only the lunch, or subsidizable is also programs?
No, it counts the subsidy too. It's a qualifier for lunch program, not exclusively. Yeah, that's what she noticed the subsidizable piece was 100.
Yeah, it was 100%. So I was, anyway, maybe we can talk after. Okay, thanks. Sorry.
Further questions, I will share the slideshow with you all in an email. If you have further questions, please don't hesitate to bring
Isn't
them
it
up.
the one you already sent us?
Oh, yeah, that's right. You have it. It's part of the packet. Okay. So you don't need me to send it. That's one less thing off my, take that off my to-do list.
Yeah, it was sent for last meeting.
I'm good. Mr. Chair. That's it for that. We just have a quick, I think, executive session. Mike.
Sorry about that. Okay, so that being the case, the presentation on agenda item 3 is completed. We'll move to agenda item number 4, which would be to enter into an executive session on a legal matter in accordance with 1 MRSA 4056E.
So moved.
So moved by Ms. Whitlow,
Second.
seconded by Ms. Bowden. Any discussion? All in favor? So moved at 7:55.